Our speaker today is Andrea Kanelopoulos, an author, motivational speaker, wellness empowerment coach, and retreat facilitator, the founder of, I hope I say this correctly, Anamnostos. Anamnostos House, to combine all her gifts into leading holistic wellness retreats and workshops. She creates, builds, and offers her teachings based on her own journey through healing her body image after a 14-year battle. Her vision is always to help others live a full life with the journey they walk. She has traveled for over 2 decades internationally and domestically, sharing her personal journey of strength, resilience, and empowered healing.
Good morning. When you do things from your soul, you feel a river moving in you, a joy. Rumi. I've learned on my journey that our stories are lessons, loves, pains, and joys, that we all can learn, grow, and become who we are meant to be on this journey within a world of self-discovery. A lived wisdom within each one of you. It is also within that self-discovery, the owning of our stories, that we become mentors to one another through the steps that we will walk every day. When I began to first tell my story within books, talks, and retreats, I witnessed that experience. When we have the courage to own our stories, we give voice to the good and the bad. We begin a cycle of forgiveness, healing, and reconciliation, and deep connection, bringing forth empathy for the stories we will encounter as we walk through our life. Anamnostos is the Celtic and the Greek, meaning soul homecomings. I love to walk people through their soul homecomings, a dive into one's stories. Today, I'm going to walk you through this process so that you begin to walk through the process of owning your stories with a goal of living your life more fully with purpose. My hope is that you will begin to see that by telling our stories, our truth, we will come into a state of peace. When you do things from your soul, how often do we pause and consider sharing and listening from a place within, from our soul? Life has become a constant on any given day. We often fail to take notice to pause and listen. We have forgotten how to connect with each other on a human level. Our journey is made up of endless stories, and within those stories are countless more stories, connecting us to the person sitting right beside you. Look around the room for a moment. Imagine the stories around you. They are endless. Growing up in a big city, I loved to sit for hours in cafes on end watching people, imagining their stories. At times, people would engage with me wondering why this young person was sitting in a cafe all day writing. And right there, in that moment, we were connected. For the first half of my life, I lived by escaping my story, whether it be sitting in cafes or behind a 14-year battle with anorexia, to a decade of incessant need to help people through service work. I ran from myself. I ran from the darkness, which was my stories. I ran from the feelings and emotions that I didn't know how to deal with and left me feeling powerless. My bottom line became fiercely masking my stories in an undeserving shame that silenced me and suffocated me. I allowed these unspoken stories to define who I thought I was as a person. They kept me from living a joy I could not even comprehend in that moment. For a decade, I would walk through countless stories of others' lives before I could find the courage to tell my own. No doubt it would become clear that my lack of personal compassion was simply building barriers after barrier before I no longer had a choice but to face my stories before they stole my life completely. It took me even longer to accept that owning my story was brave. Showing compassion and love for myself along the way would be the bravest act I would ever live. I'm still practicing that awareness and compassion daily. While it's painful to acknowledge the lost years, I'm grateful for the gift of those steps walked. They brought me home to myself. I would discover as I walked slowly forward with others in their pain, in their process, in their healing, I was gifted the greatest lesson early on, that we are here to teach each other what we need in order to embrace our true selves. I'll repeat that. We are here to teach each other what we need in order to embrace our true selves. Aren't we all guilty of holding our stories within to some extent? Our stories have the power to leave an imprint on this world. These stories intertwined within us are the roadmap to living your life with purpose. When we embrace this idea, we can then share generously and gratefully with others, recognizing that this is how we are mentors to each other. I understand hesitancy. We collectively can feel that our stories are not worthy of voicing, not interesting, or important to anyone else, to the extreme when our stories may hold pain, trauma, burden, or grief. We are more likely to stay quiet. But if we stop owning our stories and telling them, we will never fully live in that joy. We are unraveling stories that came before us to become fully alive within our own story. We're always coming back to that state of peace that we yearn for. If we stay silent in those stories, then we are not giving life to the part of us that can open a door to someone else. We miss out on receiving that human connection. Having the courage to tell our stories is living fully in the moment with purpose. Shame dies when stories are told in safe places. Anne Voskamp. One of the first places where my awareness began was volunteering in the East LA youth prison camps. It was not a ministry that was called to me by any means, but brought forth by my spiritual director at the time. I was discerning monastic life, and it would be a time where I would listen in obedience. It became a ministry that captured my heart from day one. As I was riding in the special transportation buses, through armed gates and walking through high security metal detectors being questioned, I couldn't imagine how I was going to be a help on this level. I couldn't imagine being of any worth to these young men. Our stories were so incredibly different. But were they? I very quickly learned that it was never about me. It wasn't about recognizing what brought this young man of 13 into a prison camp for life. It was about humbly being a presence. It was about listening and allowing him to be seen and heard in his darkness. It was about listening and allowing him to feel validated in his pain. Listening to his stories so that he could feel worthy. Listening so that he could kill the shame and own his story in that moment. He taught me volumes I didn't know I needed to learn. This boy was just like you and me, believe it or not. He just wanted a human connection. And in the end, that is what our stories are about as we embrace how we are all connected. So often people are just wanting to feel seen and worthy. At the end of the day, I did not see the crimes of the unfortunate path that this young man had walked through the projects of East LA. I only saw a vulnerable boy of 13 hiding his pain behind multiple gang tattoos and empty, meaningless crimes. A boy who only wanted someone to listen to him, someone to tell him he mattered. He wanted someone to hear his story. At the end of the visit, we would all gather for Mass, a crowded standing room only service, countless tattooed gang members, volunteers, and prison guards. We all had one thing in common. We prayed for healing, we prayed for peace, and we became mentors to each other. When you appear, the soul feels its worth. Father Greg Boyle, Homeboy Industries. The day I began to become more acutely aware of the power of one's stories was the day I learned how to fully and deeply listen in that prison camp. As I would walk through many people's lives in service for over a decade, I would begin the process to learning how to give voice to their stories within my own story, which eventually led me to feeling seen and heard. That translated into living life rather than existing in life. Stories intertwined. How often do you take the risk for connection sharing your stories with each other? I believe for every story inside all of us, there is one person who needs to hear it. One person who needs to know that they are not alone in their story. Sharing our stories reminds us that we are always healing, always learning, and always becoming on the journey. The human connection is what keeps us living purposeful lives. Our stories have the power to leave an imprint on this world. The day I began to release my story was the day the river began to move from my soul. It brought personal peace I never knew could exist. I experienced joy for the first time. Joy is what I feel deeply when I am profoundly owning my story within. While walking through the defining roads of treatment for over a decade, I would encounter the sacredness of endless stories from men and women sharing their recovery journey. A surprising, often defining time listening to how others suffer, knowing it connected us to each other. What was most notable is that I could see the shame in their eyes, how they sat holding their grief and pain within their bodies, not yet realizing that by releasing of those stories and false beliefs, they could redefine who they were in order to heal. I often sat in a tight, curled up body hold in those rooms, a wounded child, a very painful mirror to face, but an image and moment I own. The common bond within our stories was that we all thought we were alone until we shared. We not only had the connection of the illness that we battled, but the stories that led us to that illness. These moments are moments I return to often, for they were my first real experience of human connection, the beginning of walking towards peace. Ever since that time, I share in retreats, workshops, coaching sessions. I can see in the eyes of those before me that moment, that similar connection. Powerful. I don't think that there is anyone in this room who has not walked a story that has molded their thinking process today. It's easy to hold on to a story and not be able to see it for the gift that it offered. A gift that someone needs to receive from you. As I speak and write today, I believe my stories of healing resonate, help others to begin to voice theirs, and just remember once sitting alone on the other side. My story lived and breathed in shame and pain. I was at dis-ease with myself until I found my brave. My brave became my voice. My voice became the foundation built so that I could be seen and heard for the first time. I would like to believe that my voice, my personal compassion, became hope for others to find their brave and share their stories. Living life with purpose. We have to make a choice to own the light, to own the joy, and love as much as our pain, woundedness, or struggle that comes from our stories exists. This gives others permission to embrace beginning their personal stories and transformation. Mentors to one another. We have to be able to embrace the gift within all of our stories. The young boy of 13 in the prison camp taught me that I had to find the courage to own my story that I had been running from. The men and women I encountered in treatment and 12-step programs showed me how to take those steps in order to feel safe, in order to own my story so that I was worthy. When I finally spoke my weakness in a strong voice, I released the power and control this one story held over me, embracing the deeper meaning. The moment I began to voice my story, life opened. I never realized until that moment. In the healing, I began to rewrite the story. In the healing, I owned the story and was no longer powerless, but empowered. I finally chose to see the light. I chose joy, and I could embrace my purpose within my story. Honest darkness will always stand accepted over a false sense of light. A final story close to my heart. I don't normally share too much in depth about this part of my life, as it holds great reverence for me. I've been ministering in Lourdes, France, at the Grotto of Our Lady for over 20 years in person and from afar. It is a Catholic Marian pilgrimage site where people from all faiths, all beliefs around the world come in search of the healing waters. It is said that over 70 miracles have happened since its beginning. This is normally not something I'm pulled to, much like the prison camp. A dear friend in my parish was dying of cancer, and she traveled to the baths for her miracle. Upon returning home, 3 weeks before she died, she called me to her bedside. She shared that she was going through the baths and she had a vision of me working there and asked me to go do so in her memory. I agreed emphatically, knowing she needed this closure piece in order to let go. A year after she had died, my mentor reminded me of this moment. He said that I had to fulfill this promise. It was so far outside of my comfort zone, but the community came together from frequent flyer miles to living in a monastery for the entire summer for me to be able to go and do this work. I don't speak of this experience often because it's incredibly humbling. I've continued this work for nearly 2 decades, traveling there nearly a dozen times. It's indeed a holy place, but not like you would think. I was stationed to minister in the grotto, where the people walk through to touch their hand to the rock where the water would flow miraculously, as well in the sacred baths with the children and the women. Often praying their experience, I watched hundreds to thousands of people come in wheelchairs, stretchers, often in their frail last moments. They paid their respects. They bathed in the holy water with their final days of illness upon them. What I found was that they came in gratitude, an indescribable peace, and in an awareness for the end of their journey was near. Not necessarily for a miracle. Then it unfolded before me. People wanted to tell me their stories in broken English, French, and when the language barrier was great, they found a way. They just wanted to share their story, knowing that was to be their last moments, that they were seen and heard. A holy, beauty, full circle moment. On the days that I wasn't assigned to work, I'd sit on the stone ledge by the grotto, watch quietly as people touch the holy rock, fill their water bottles with holy water, and light candles for loved ones. So many stories I could imagine. A sacredness beyond words humbling, as the bell towers chimed and the symphony of languages prayed. As a witness to this site and a journey I walk with many in my life while studying to be a death doula. I've been honored to sit with people as they lay dying. It is the most profound to listen as they are able to speak their stories with what little energy they have in their last breaths. They simply want to leave this earth having been seen. Some of the stories in this room may be stories often no one wants to give voice to, but we must. I found if I live in that place without this learned openness, I'm never giving myself a chance to live fully with purpose. We must give voice to our stories. We must trust what will follow. When was the last time you truly owned your unique story? There's no greater agony than bearing an untold story inside of you. Maya Angelou. We have to choose to make room for human connection, so we are not merely existing in life. We are not living authentically when we are holding ourselves back and not giving way to connection. From the endless stories that sit in those lives in retirement and nursing homes, to the soldiers who come home from war quiet, to the countless broken children living their lives in foster homes, to those in our own community who hold stories of pain and grief, to the person sitting right beside you. We are mentors to each other, stories intertwined. I see you. I want to hear your story. In the end, we all just want someone to sit with us, to walk with us, to listen to our story, to know that our story mattered in this life, bringing us a universal peace. I hold no regrets for becoming the person I was always meant to become. I hold no regrets for speaking my stories. I hold no shame for owning my story today as it is in this moment. I'm grateful how my story has connected me to the people I may not have otherwise crossed paths with. I'm grateful for finding my peace. My story is a gift in all its suffering and joy, as is yours. When you appear, the soul feels its worth. What is your story?